StraightallDay.com.
The essence of editing. What exactly is editing? Editing, Editing. What does editing actually mean? We're gonna let's get a definition of the word first. Edit, so everyone's on the same page. It is a transitive verb. It means to prepare, such as written material, for publication or presentation by correcting, revising, or adapting, or to modify or adapt so as to make suitable or acceptable. So we have some subjective terms in here, but the direction of that definition is exactly what we're talking about here. It is to prepare something by correcting, revising, or adapting, or to make it suitable, quote unquote, for presentation. I'm putting that in quotes because your version of suitable may be different from my version of suitable. It's up to whoever's doing the editing what makes it suitable. So I thought of this episode because I was thinking of the editing process when it comes to writing, because a coaching client of mine, actually a couple of them, have asked me questions about writing books. If I want to write a book about my knowledge, or I want to get a book published, what's the process? What are the things I need to do? What about the editing? As I tell them that the biggest part, I'll tell all of you, the biggest part of writing a book, the most tedious part, the most strenuous part of not even writing a book. Let me rephrase that. The most strenuous part of publishing a book. So the publishing includes the writing of it, includes the conceptualization of the book. That is, what is this going to be? Then there's the idea, and there's the ideation, what's going to be in it. Then there's the actual writing, that's putting words on paper. Then there's the editing, that's getting it suitable for presentation. Then there's the design of the book. How is the book going to look? How many pages it's going to have? What fonts you're going to use, et cetera, et cetera. That's the interior formatting. The exterior formatting is the cover, the front cover, the back cover, the covers, et cetera. Is going to be text on the spine, depending on the size of the book. It either can be or it cannot be, depending on how many pages your book is. Then there's the marketing of the book, i.e. letting people know that a book is coming, and then how you're going to get it into the hands of people. Do you want to sell the book on Amazon? You want to sell it on your website? You want to sell it on both? You want to go out and sell it on the street corner? You want to sell it out the trunk of your car? All of that is part of the publishing process of a book. And publishing is actually getting the book, a physical copy of the book, in your actual hands. And then there's the selling of the book. It has to be available somewhere where someone can go to the place where it is and they can exchange money for the book, i.e. a physical bookstore, i.e. they buy it from you at some local swap meet out of the the trunk of your car, or they can go on a website like Amazon or yourwebsite.com and they can buy your book. All of that is part of the book publishing, marketing, and selling process. So I tell people that the editing process is the most strenuous part of all of this. Why? Because the editing process is where you got to take all the stuff you've already done and you got to chop it down and figure out what parts need to stay and what parts need to go. And again, the coaching client was asking about this, and I was telling them that my writing process, for anyone who wants to know, is I come up with a raw idea. That is, what do I want to write a book about? I jot down all the notes and points that I want to make about that idea, and then I just cut away anything that doesn't fit perfectly with the idea itself. Anything that's not necessary for getting the point across. That's my editing process. This is basically how all of my books have been written, and all of my articles get written this way. Even my social media posts get written this way. Now, usually with articles and social media posts, I don't have to cut down so much stuff. But anytime I write a book, I'm doing a whole lot of cutting down. However, editing is not just about writing books. Okay, it's not even about content creation. You can do editing in all of your life. You can edit things like your mindset. You can edit your associations. You can edit any aspect of what you do. You can edit your behaviors as well. So that's what we're talking about here today, is the editing, the essence of editing, what it means, and why it's so important when it comes to future success. Point number one, topic once again is the essence of editing. Number one, clarity and addition by deletion. This is something we were just talking about a few episodes ago, is that when you're looking to make advances in life, many people make the mistake of thinking that they need to add on, do more, and make additions to their behaviors, their thoughts, their tools, their assets, their resources. When actually what you need to do is the opposite, which is eliminate things so that you have fewer things to focus on. And then as you focus on that essential few that remains, you can do your best with that essential few. The key here is discerning what is the essential few you should keep and what is the junk that you need to get rid of. You're clear on that, then it's easy to make decisions. So this is clarity and addition by deletion. So for the most part, any of you who's ever been a part of an editing process, you understand this. Most editing is simply deleting the unnecessary. That's the majority of what editing is. Now, there are other pieces like For example, when I was working on one of my books, I had an editor working on it, and she would take certain sections of the book and let's move this section to that chapter and move this section to that chapter. And let's put this chapter, which you have, let's put chapter 5, which you have after chapter 4. Let's actually move those around. And chapter 5 should go first and chapter 4 should go second, just because of the flow of it. So sometimes you're just moving pieces, but a lot of the editing is just taking what's already there and chopping it down so that there's less there. When I wrote my book, Work on Your Game, for example, I wrote initially 250,000 words for the book because I was contracted for a certain number of words. I believe the number was 150,000 that the book publisher wanted to have a certain length of a book. I wrote 250,000 words. The editing process was about cutting out the 100,000 extemporaneous words that didn't need to go into the book. Now I use those for a different book, but the whole point was the editing process. A lot of it was just cutting stuff down. There was very little in the editing process where I needed to add more pieces in. And any pieces that I did add in was more than made up for by the pieces that got taken out. So there were some points where my editor would say, okay, you made this point right here, Dre, but explain more about how this works. Explain why this makes sense. Or I may need to add a paragraph or two, but the number of paragraphs that got cut way outnumbered the number of paragraphs that got added. So that's really what the editing process is about, cutting things down. The challenge for a lot of human beings, especially in the world that we're in today, is that a lot of people have a mindset of addition. You're always trying to add new things in instead of cutting things down. So in the editing process, you want to be thinking about deletion. 98% of the time, you're cutting stuff. So if you record an hour's worth of content and you're about to put out a 15-minute video on YouTube, or a video that ends up being 15 minutes on YouTube, you had to cut down 45 minutes of the material that you recorded. And anytime I talk to videographers, people who make video, they say, like, I film in a way that I know exactly how I'm going to edit. So the videographers will say, I'll do the filming because I know exactly what I need to shoot and I know exactly how I'm going to edit. So it makes the editing process as easy as possible if they film it the right way. So it's often easier for the person who did the recording to also be the person doing the editing when it comes to video, because they know exactly what they shot, so they know exactly what they're looking for. Now it is possible that the person who recorded the video or shot the video and the person who edits it are not the same people, but it often works best when they are either working together, they're on the same page as to what needs to be done, versus when they're not, because then the person who is doing the editing has to look through the footage to figure out what the hell do we have here and what do I cut down. So I explained with the book, you cut it down. You go to a conference, for example, and you meet 85 people at some event that you go to. You may follow up with and end up working with maybe 5 or 6 people from that conference, maybe nobody from the conference, even though you shook 85 hands. The mistake that a lot of people make, especially in Western society, because it's been ingrained into all of us, is that we need to add. Everything is about addition. More hustle, more trying, more time in order to become more. This is often backwards, especially once you get to a certain level of skill. Once you're at a certain level of competence, your key activity is, what do I get rid of, not what do I add on. The more things you edit, the more you get down to the essential elements that matter the most. And then once you get down to those essential elements, you quadruple down on the things that make the most impact. So a book that I've read recently is called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and he describes this concept very well. And there's an episode in the show where I told you that if all social publishing platforms were to create a limit where everybody had to pick just one platform and that's the only one that you can publish to, I would pick the audio version of this show because it's the most essential piece of all the stuff that I put out in terms of free content on the internet. And it's the one that makes the most impact for me and on the type of people who I ideally want to reach. So I can make impact on people on any platform I use. You give me Snapchat, I'll figure out a way to make an impact. But the one where I have the best mix of what I want to do and who I want to reach will be this one right here. The point is, editing is about cutting down the things that don't matter and focusing more, tripling down, quadrupling down, sextupling down on the things that matter the most. The key is you got to figure out what matters the most. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is the essence of editing. Number 2, doing more things more effectively by needing and using less. This is the essence of editing. Editing means that you can be more effective and you can get more done when you need less and you use less. Why? Because again, you have narrowed down to the effective things, the essential things. Therefore, you can get a lot more done because you have discerned that these things allow you to be more effective. If you only use these 3 as opposed to all these 10, these 3 actually allow you to be more effective because they're the 3 that are making the biggest difference. See, editing is about this concept of essentialism, which I just explained to you. Figuring out what matters most, and what makes the most impact, putting all of your resources into those things. What matters most, what makes the most impact, let's put all of our resources into that and cut everything else off. That's essentially what it is. My favorite book of all time is called The 48 Laws of Power, written by Robert Greene. There's a chapter in that book, I believe it's chapter 23, law number 23, concentrate your forces, which says what? Take your resources, whatever resources you have, and focus them all on their strongest point. It's kind of like taking a magnifying glass and magnifying the heat of the sun. You can start a fire with that. If you put that magnified sun, the rays of the sun, and magnify it and put it on a tree bark, you can set the tree on fire. When you were a child, you may remember doing this with ants. You can basically melt an ant from being alive and just melting it dead with a magnifying glass, just magnifying the power of the sun's rays right on top of the ant. You can burn yourself if you put it on your skin. So what it means, again, is taking all your resources, focus them on their strongest points so you can get the highest return on investment possible from the area in which you have the greatest opportunity. So the key here, before you do any of these things, is you have to edit down and ask yourself, where do I have the greatest opportunity? Where can I produce the highest level of ROI? And what resources can best help me exploit that great opportunity and be as effective as possible in doing so? See, once you answer those questions, then it'll be easy to figure out what to edit, what to cut out, and what to keep. The problem is many people never ask themselves these questions. So back in the days, we had athletes like Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, who were very famous, both of them, because they were both famous for playing both baseball and football professionally, essentially at the same time. The reality is, though, a lot of athletes who play one of the 4 major sports, including basketball and hockey, many of those athletes were good at other sports besides the one that you know them for. Maybe good enough to have been a star in high school. For example, LeBron James was a pretty good high school football player, I heard. Allen Iverson, another player who, you know him from basketball, he was a very good high school football player. I've heard many players, I'm not remembering them all off the top of my head, were very good at playing baseball and football and just decided they were going to play certain sports. I heard that Derek Jeter, I believe, was really good at playing basketball. If you look on social media, you'll often see videos or clips of football players in the NFL playing basketball. And football players are usually pretty athletic, big, muscular, athletic, fast twitch muscles, explosive, so they can jump and they can do dunks. Now, some of you may have been told by some football players that they were good enough to play in the NBA. That's complete bullshit. Most football players are too bulky and not nearly rangy enough. Their coordination is not good enough to play basketball with anybody who can seriously play, but they can play with some LA Fitness guys, definitely. I remember in my hometown, Philadelphia, we had a player for a couple of years named Terrell Owens, really good wide receiver who's in the Hall of Fame, one of the best of all time. Terrell Owens often insisted that he was a really good basketball player, and he probably believed it, but I've seen his nickname was T.O. for his initials, Terrell Owens. I've seen T.O. play basketball. He wasn't good enough to play basketball. He wasn't good enough to even play in college, let alone was he going to play at the pro level. Not against anybody who can actually play. And there's a lot of football players who fall into this delusion, and a lot of everyday fans who don't know what high-level basketball looks or feels like, who thinks that a football player could play. I remember there's another guy who played for the Miami Dolphins. His name was Brandon Marshall. I believe he's still based in Miami. Last I seen him, it's been a while since I've seen anything from this guy. He's about 6'5". He's a wide receiver, similar to Terrell Owens. And wide receivers tend to be fast, long, and often tall. So they think they can play basketball. So Brandon Marshall is probably about the same height as T.O., maybe about 6'5". And he was claiming that he was serious, that he could possibly make it to the NBA at one point during his career. That was bullshit. Brandon Marshall could not play in the NBA. He did not have that kind of basketball talent. He's very good at football. He had an NFL career, but basketball, no. The point is, he probably played basketball in high school, and he was probably very good. The point that I'm making here is that a lot of athletes that you know from major sports at the professional level doing very well often had talent in other sports. But we only know about Deion Sanders and Bo Jackson when it comes to guys who took both talents and two things all the way up to the pro level. And the thing is, these other players who could have played other sports, or at least they claim that they could have played other sports, or even those who don't claim it, but it's known that they were good in other sports, they decided to essentialize and focus, narrowing their efforts to one particular sport. And that's the one that we know them for. So very rare is the person who can do two disparate things at a professional level at the same time. Two disparate things at a pro level at the same time. That's why you only know about Deion and Bo Jackson. You don't know of any other athlete who was able to do that because it's very difficult to do. Even though you'll hear athletes claiming they could do it, yeah, they're just making claims. So let's see you actually do it. And the fact is they can't, because you don't have enough resources to dedicate to the study and the practice and the preparation necessary to be pro level at two things at the same time, because you're competing against a bunch of people who are doing what? Focusing on one thing at a time. No one's that talented that they can divide their resources between multiple things and still be pro level at both of them. For 99% of humans, 99.9% of humans, you got to figure out where you have the greatest opportunity, put all your eggs in that basket, and as the saying goes, watch the hell out of that one basket, all the eggs in that one spot. Point number 3, today's topic once again is the essence of editing. And we're talking about cutting down and getting down to the essential elements of what you do. Remember the point of doing or saying anything? The point is to achieve the outcome. Point is, what are we trying to do here? What's the goal? What are we trying to get done? If the goal isn't reached, you lose. And all the resources you put into it, maybe not completely going to waste, but you put all the resources into it because you're looking to get a specific outcome, not just to say that you did it. So complexity loses the audience. When you're too complex, when you go too deep, or you're not clear enough, you may lose yourself, let alone losing your audience. I talk about this often when I'm discussing politicians, particularly those who win the biggest election, which is the presidential election in the United States. You win a presidential election by getting your point across clearly and simply to hundreds of millions of voters. That's how you win. Getting your point across clearly and simply to hundreds of millions of people. Here's the part you have to understand. You can't be too smart or too complex or go too deep when you're talking to a group of that size. Why? Because you don't know the intelligence level of everyone in the group. So you have to speak to the lowest common denominator in your audience. And if you don't do that, you go over too many people's heads. And if people don't understand you, then they can't follow you, they cannot support you, and they're probably not going to show up to the voting booth and vote for you, which means you failed to achieve the goal. The goal is to win the election. So to win the election, you got to speak at a simple enough level that you're sure everyone who is listening to you understands you. And when your audience is 100 million people, you got to speak at the most basic, simple level that you can to make sure you're not losing anybody with the complexity of your vernacular. And here I am using the complex word vernacular, your complexity of your speech, complexity of your talk. And that means they are able to follow it and, of course, hopefully act on it. Studies have shown, this is a real thing in politics, that speakers who speak on an elementary school reading level, like around the 2nd or 3rd grade reading level, that's the level of their speech, they tend to perform better in elections than the speakers who speak on middle school, high school, or collegiate levels. Meaning the more complex your sentence structure, the bigger the words that you use, the more complex generally your speech is. And when your speech is too complex, there are people who don't have the intelligence to keep up with you. Therefore, they can't catch your message. Therefore, they can't vote for you. Therefore, you lose. So you got to keep it simple. So people often talk about President Donald Trump. They say, well, he he has all the uneducated people vote for him, whatever that means. People say that as some form of pejorative. I think that's proof of his genius, is that he understands what I just explained to you. Unconsciously he understands it, that you have to speak on a really basic level to make sure masses of people can understand you. Because if you speak on too high a level, you elevate your speech above the mind of the masses. The problem with going above the mind of the masses is that the masses can't vote for you, and the masses are the ones who help you win. And remember what game we're in. We're not in the game of proving how smart you are when you're running for a presidential election. The game is not proving I'm more intelligent than you, or that I have more intelligent people supporting me than you have. The goal is winning the election. And whatever you need to do to win, that's what you need to do, which means if I got to, quote unquote, dumb down what I'm saying to make sure everybody understands it, well, that's a job. Because what are you running for? You're running for a job of serving everybody, not just the people who are on your level of intellect. You're looking to serve everybody, even those who only know half of what you know. So the reason is exactly what I just told you. When you're talking to the masses, everybody's not as smart as you are, and you can't be too smart for your own audience. This applies to all of you, even if you're not running for president. When you stand in front of a room of people and you're speaking on any subject, doesn't matter what it is, whether you're trying to sell, you're trying to persuade, you're trying to influence, you're trying to motivate, you need to make sure that whatever you say and whatever level upon which you say it, your audience can understand it and they can follow you. Because if your audience can't understand or follow what you're saying, they can't benefit from it. And then what's the point of you speaking? point of you speaking publicly is to get a point across to an audience and to get them to at least appreciate or acknowledge or activate themselves based on what you said to actually either go do something, think something, or change in some particular way. This requires you, if you're going to reach people at their level, you must narrow down and edit your message to make sure you're saying what needs to be said, what needs to be understood, and that everyone understands what they need to do, if anything, as a result of hearing what you had to say. This is all part of your job as a presenter of anything. Let's recap today's class, which is the essence of editing. And again, I thought of this thinking of the writing process, but this applies to anything that you're doing. Number one, when you edit, you are creating clarity and addition by deletion. Most people do this backwards. They try to add by adding. You actually need to add by subtracting. That's what editing means. Number two, you get to do more effectively by needing and using less. When you get clear on what exactly do I want to get done, and you're clear on it, and you're clear on what exactly helps me do it, you're clear on that, now you double down and triple down and quadruple down on only those things and release everything else. You can focus, you can concentrate your forces at their strongest point. Number three, remember the point of doing or saying anything. It is to achieve the desired outcome. So you need to be clear, what is the outcome of what I'm doing here? When you're clear on the outcome, then all your editing should be based on what helps me get to this outcome. What helps me get to this outcome? What helps me get to this outcome? When you're asking the right questions, then the answers become a whole lot easier. Challenge for a lot of people is that they get answers to the wrong questions. So even though they feel like they have all the quote unquote information and all the answers, you're getting answers to questions that you shouldn't have even been asking in the first place. You need better questions, which is called insight. Speaking of insight, speaking of getting better questions, speaking of editing, and speaking of achieving the desired, clearly stated outcome, go to workonyourgameuniversity.com, where you will have me as your coach, holding you accountable, helping you systematize your strategies, and most importantly, getting yourself into the proper mindset so that you are getting, first of all, setting the standards for the performance level that you need to be at to achieve the goals you want to achieve. Go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. That's workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre all